Okay. Good morning, everyone. After seeing contemporary art, I'll bring you back to the 18th century, if you don't mind, talking a little bit of a project I've been running on the side for many years with different colleagues at the Fine Art Museum in Saint-Quentin in France and the National Research Center LAMS in Paris. I'll try this. Yep. So first, where is Saint-Quentin? Saint-Quentin is in the north of France, as you can see on the map, and I will explain to you a little bit what's the context of the museum and its collection, what kind of conservation steps were involved in the very general lines, the scientific research that we brought to the museum, and a little bit how the museum decided to communicate about it, knowing that this is just an ongoing project. So there are some limitation. But first, let's talk about Maurice. Maurice Quentin de la Tour is a very famous pastelist, actually from Saint-Quentin, so a very proud, famous artist for the city, considered as one of the most important pastelists for the 18th century, for the Rococo period in all Europe. He's an interesting character because even though his art is very interesting, he also founded himself a drawing school that still exists in the city, and I'll show you where it is. He's very famous for very, very large portraits. You might know some of them, two very famous at the Louvre and at the Getty Museum, which are very fascinated because of the size of the pastels, so they're made out of different sheets of paper. But we also have smaller official portraits from political figures of his time throughout Europe, as well as preparatory figures for those large pastels. He draws mostly on blue paper using pastel. Here is Saint-Quentin, and you have on this side the actual drawing school, which still exists and was founded, as I said, by the artist. In 1856, a first museum around his collection, his artworks, was founded, and it actually moved only in 1886 to the location you see now. What is remarkable about this collection is that the core of the collection actually comes from his studio, so this is whatever was remaining in his workshop at his death, and today there are about 97 pastels by him in the museum. It is, however, a small museum. They only get about 11,000 visitors per year, and it is a city museum, so I will emphasize that again later in the presentation. And as you see it today, it was actually rebuilt in 1928, between 1928 and 1932. Because it actually looked like that in 1910, and during the First World War, it was completely bombed. So I'm just going to drive you through what I think is fascinating history of this collection, and I'm always amazed that it still remains amongst us. Because this area during the First World War was an occupied area, and it's quite interesting that in 1917, the Nazis who were occupying the area decided to move the pastel collection of the time, so 87 pastels, to another city in the north as well, in Maubeuge, in this house, which was actually a shop. And there is documentation about this process. I will show you that. And they even gave reasons for that, which I think is really interesting. There's a lot of debate amongst the authority of that time, but the Nazis were claiming that this was for conservation reasons. So they said that the climate in this building was much drier and suitable for the pastels. It was safer because they could guarantee safeguarding 24/7. It was also a great propaganda tool. At that time, the Nazis were trying to show that they were not stealing artwork, but rather moving them to another location to spread culture. And for this collection, the main argument behind was to say that they wanted to bring culture to the soldiers during their resting time. Of course, this was quite controversial at the time. You have quite extensive documentation of how it looks like. So there are pictures available online, now fully digitized, that shows how the pastels were exhibited during the First World War. And you have an image here in 1918 from one of these rooms. At the end of the First World War, it was decided by the French authority very quickly to move back the pastels. So there is a very fascinating literature about the transport of those objects, and there was a lot of efforts in trying to understand how to move back this collection. So you have actual photographs of the packing, as well as how the truck was loaded with a very fancy suspension system using sandbags and polices. So this is already in itself quite interesting. Unfortunately, Second World War, the pastel got transported again to one first castle in the Mayen region, a second castle in the Sarthe region, and it's only in 1945 that the pastels got transported back to Saint-Quentin. And they were transported back in a museum that was just renovated, that looks like that from the inside. You have here the main gallery as it looks like today. This is one of the pastel rooms as it looks like today as well, renovated in 2019. There are 3 different rooms. Before 2019, the lighting was purely halogen, so after 2 months of renovation, they moved on into dynamic LED lighting, which means that basically if no one is in the room, the light is dimmed, not completely dark, to 10 to 20 lux, to still invite people to come in and to let them understand that there is more to look into the museum. But then when someone comes in, the light is turned on to 40, 60 lux, so people can actually look at the artworks. Here is a second view of another room. What is interesting with this collection is that there is quite well-known, I would say, conservation history. This collection, probably because of its history, as I just said before, has been restored many times, and we have sources of someone in the 40s called Le Pelletier, who basically unframed some of the pastels, cleaned the glass, removed mold, and reframed the pastels. We know that since the 90s, there were regular campaigns, and we have documentation about that. Since 2018, they managed to kind of set up a yearly conservation campaign where they're able to have enough budget to restore 1 to 5 pastels and kind of start a kind of rotation every year, but only of a few pastels. Because the funding comes mostly from the city and the region, so they have limited budget, but they're trying to reach out to get more like private sponsors for larger projects. I'll go back to that. So my talk now will just focus on the latest campaign that was in 2022, for which I worked on 3 objects. The first one were 2 so-called preparations or study figures. You have on your left the portraits of the king, Louis XV, and on the right a portrait of Marie Fell, who was a very famous opera singer, also the mistress of the artist, according to some sources. The third pastel was a more finished artwork, so properly mounted onto a strainer, depicting Abbot Hubert reading a book. We know of other copies of this pastel, notably in Switzerland. So the first thing that had to be done was actually unframing those pastels. For the abbot, it was quite a challenging task because it's very large and I'm alone to work on these things. So besides the art handlers, I'm the only conservator involved. And at the back, it's quite common to find a wooden backing board. And the glazing, interesting enough, is usually quite thick, so more than 7 millimeters thick, so quite heavy. And all this conservation happens in the storage room, so wherever they have space, we're just going with the object because they don't have proper conservation studios, which I think a lot of you will recognize in other institutions, unfortunately. It was quite interesting because upon unframing, you can find some very interesting materials used to seal the frame, for example. No precise date, but we think this might be coming indeed during the wars, because there's a lot of things, I think, in the reframing that happened because of these transports. We're not clear exactly why and how they did that, but it seems that those are traces of that. We found a lot of pieces of paper, handwritten papers that were kept and that are now currently investigated by the curator in charge. The collection is also well known for the seals, the wax seals that have been applied at different times throughout the collection. And you see here 2 superimposed seals, which we try to keep with the object. In this case, I used the printing room and the meeting room to kind of unframe the smaller pastels because the lighting was a north lighting that was very good for me to document the pastels and work on the pastels. We could, of course, look into the surface of the pastel, but also the ghosting that appeared on the glazing, which is something that I think some people working with framed objects will recognize. I'm not clear exactly why this happens, but we are seeing it quite a lot. The next step is the actual cleaning. If there is mold, then you have an example here on how I work, using basically a micro-kit connected to a HEPA filter, a vacuum cleaner, and a kind of glass pipette that has little hair from a brush on the edge. This is being published in a French journal, but you have other publications that demonstrate how this actually comes from other conservators before. Then we used basically the system that was developed and still in use at the Rijksmuseum, and you have the publication in the journal Paper Conservation about details about how this is done, to kind of create a box around the pastels, so the box with the glass hopefully can go into the frame, so it becomes independent from the frame. This is how it looks like. The pastel is inserted into the box. I'll show you a cross-section. Roughly speaking, but again, the details are in the publication, the pastel is inserted into different layers of cardboard that are surrounded, as you see, with this black layer with a Tyvek that is glued with Evertcon or. At the back, depending on the museums I work with, they could be cardboard. In that case, they wanted specifically corrugated polyethylene sheets, because they were worried about leakage, about actual liquid water because of the state of their storage. And the sealing on the outside was done with a nylon aluminum polyethylene barrier foil, and you see the laminated glass at the top. So this comes wrapping around. You have a bigger view in this case, where the aluminum foil is not yet attached to the glass. And then this old package or box is basically inserted into the frame. In this case, the frame was was actually restored, and a build-up was inserted at the back by someone else working for the museum. So this is something where I work with a framer. Quite important, and I think this was set up with the Rijksmuseum, and I think it's quite nice, all the little labels to explain how to remove and open the box. This is quite useful from experience, because when you have to unframe a pastel and you have no idea what the layers are inside, we wished the previous conservators had done that, so we're trying to add that at the back of the object. And this is a view from the front with my colleagues carrying it. On the left is Jeremy, the registrar, and Philippe on the handling team. So going back a little bit to the research, this moment is actually quite unique because it's the moment when the actual materials are accessible. You don't have glass anymore, but you also see materials that was not exhibited to light so much. So you have an example here of the portrait of Marie Fell, which is actually drawn on a piece of blue paper that is folded multiple times. And the backside shows quite an original blue color. You can guess the extent of the light damage. The photo on the right shows the middle part with strong yellowing, and the edges were protected by the rebate of the frame, where we show something that looks like the original blue color. So this is the moment when my colleagues from the National Research Center came in and actually traveled from Paris by train with all their equipment in a suitcase. So the idea is that they are highly portable. They came for free as part of their mission as a research center to the museum close to the object. And the team was with Emmeline Pouyet, Lucine Brunel Duverger, and Laurence de Viguerie. And the goal was there to kind of look into the papers and can we be a little bit better into understanding the composition and the degradation that we are noticing. And of course the media, trying to understand the inorganic pigments, the organic dyes, maybe binders and fixatives present. This was the location of our analysis. So we are far away from the lab, we are far away from ideal condition, but this is what we have to work on. And that's why I always like to refer to MacGyver in that case. For me, he's a great help and mentor to try to find out what to do in this space to still make scientifically proven information. So this is how it looked like. We managed to do technical imaging next to this beautiful vase that we did not break. It stayed there throughout the whole analysis. We managed to do point XRF with an in-house system that they developed in the lab. Reflectance imaging spectroscopy in the visible near infrared system, sometimes called hyperspectral. We also managed to do FTIR, so trying to look into the organic compounds, but also looking into with fiber optic reflectance spectroscopy in the shortwave infrared to look into another range. So this gives you a bit the idea of the MacGyver toolbox that we had, a little bit fancy, a bit advanced MacGyver skills, but still working very well. The goal in that case was to obtain what we called a spectroscopic continuum. So we wanted to see if we were able to look at the same material under different wavelengths, basically going from the X-rays using XRF all the way to the mid-infrared. For this project, we had to use a few reference material, and this was a little challenging, but I'm just going to show you what we ended up using. We used the so-called blue paper sampler that we just launched with the Blue Paper Research Consortium. It's a set of known composition blue papers made out of indigo and woad and linen rags that were actually very good to calibrate the equipment. And next to that, in situ, we had an actual modern pastel box that was left by the Maison du Pastel, which is a pastel maker company. I'll go back to that. And a so-called historical pastel box that was given to the museum as being from Latour. Fortunately, no pastel sticks in there, but definitely powder. So we did sample those colors. They are still under examination, so we'll see what we find. But this is now where I'm going to just give you some of the most, I think, relevant information you can get from this technique. The full details are available in the article that we just published, so if you want to see the scientific results, they are out now. But let me just guide you through what the type of information we found. So, looking at Louis XV, we looked at spectra in the visible near infrared range. The first spectrum, number 1, is in the preserved blue area. We then moved to the edge where this color shift happens, and more inside the actual yellowed and discolored area. What we found out is that we are in the presence of indigo, so there is indigo into the paper in all the regions we looked at, and in the area that is much more discolored, it seems that there is a shift at 60 nanometer, which corresponds actually to the discoloration of indigo. Interesting enough, we found the spectral features of degradation products both in the discolored and non-discolored area of the paper. And for Marifel, we actually found gypsum in the paper, so I'm just throwing the question at the audience. We think it might be a filler in the paper, but if anyone else has seen gypsum in 18th century papers, I'd be interested in hearing what it could be. We also tried to make it more visual. So using the reflectance imaging spectroscopy, we were able to kind of map and create infrared false color images. You have the two pastels we are looking at, so Marifel on your left, Louis XV on the right, and we're looking at small details in red and green. On the upper two rectangles are the visible, how they look like under visible light, and right under is the same image looking at with infrared false color. The first thing we could see is that we could map the actual indigo in the paper, which looks pink in the infrared false color, and we could map the actual discolored area, which looks here orangey on the infrared false color, and these corresponds from the spectral information we have to both the yellowing of the cellulose and the discoloration of the indigo. And this is something I'm still looking into, trying to understand better what happens there. In terms of media, I'm just going to sum up what we got. For the whites and fillers, we found the presence of lead white, calcite, kaolinite, and gypsum. In the shadows, amber and bone black. In the reds, ochre and vermilion used in very specific place. For the yellow, the ochres and yellow lake. And for the blue, azurite, Prussian blue, and indigo. This is a bit the summary. We try to convey that again into moving out from the spectra. I mean, the spectra are available in the publication, but we're trying to think about how can we share that with the public? How can we make it more appealing? And visualization might be one way. So this is one of the mapping you can get out of reflectance image spectroscopy. And we use that to kind of compare the data we had from the three objects. The first is that it seems that we get very similar materials and techniques for the two lower portraits, while the upper one, which is a more finished pastel, seems to have a more complex build-up, slightly different technique, which was expected, but it's confirmed with the composition. Unfortunately, with all these non-invasive and techniques, we could not identify the binder and the fixative. And we think that this comes from the fact that the cellulose might actually overwhelm the signal in the area we are looking at. We could identify actually organic dyes, such as yellow lake and indigo. And we are thinking, it seems obvious, but it seems to confirm with the choice of colors that I use, that the shadow that you see right now around Louis XV and Marie Fell was intended to blend much more smoothly onto a blue paper. So the question that we are now still thinking about, and I don't have results yet to show, but I'm throwing the question here just to hear if anyone has experience with that, is how can we present these scientific results to the public to make it understandable and still enjoyable? So we have the publication already out. Now what we are thinking with the curatorial team is how can we present that? The museum already has events going on, so basically they're trying after each conservation campaign to have something happening. It's a very small museum again, but they organize, for example, here concerts with costume to kind of give more context to the collection. They also organize for the 90th anniversary of the museum a special event with two pastel makers, Isabelle Rocher and Margaret Zeyer from the Maison du Pastel, who demonstrated how they make pastels today. And so they actually led the public throughout the different steps, and they made the pastels in front of it, so they brought their equipment there. But what is wonderful about this, event is that the Maison du Pastel accepted to leave some of their archival material to the museum, so that's a process they are going through now to give some archival materials to museum, and left the actual pastels they made on the day. So this is now part of the exhibition space. The museum has inserted it into the room to kind of give more materiality into the room, so also to make people let people understand that the original colors they might see of pastels that were made in 2022 will, throughout time, degrade and might look like the portraits they're seeing on the wall. So it's a little bit what they're thinking about. Of course, there's regular expert meetings trying to look at the collection, either at newly restored pastels or pastels that need future conservation. They also have children's game, and as a pastel nerd, I'm always happy to see a game with pastels. So they use their collection to kind of interact with children. This is a Who is Who game, very well known in France. But they also have visits, they have workshops, so they're trying to build around the permanent collection. They also have images throughout the city, mostly near the museum. And this is interesting, it's pictures taken during conservation that is now outside the museum. During the project, there was a documentary made by the city. So you see here Victorien following us throughout all the steps of the conservation and the actual scientific research, performing interviews, and I was hoping that I could show you the documentary today, but unfortunately this is not possible. They're still working on it, so hopefully this will come up quite soon. Just to conclude a little bit this project, I think what was interesting with them is that we're dealing with a small institution that indeed has a small budget, but still houses a very high value collection. This is something that a lot of researchers are interested in, a lot of historians, and the collection is very well known. And it seems that with very little, we are able to have a large impact just for the community around. What was amazing is that throughout this National Research Center, we were able to build something that is new, so a new methodology, a new in situ methodology to look at the materials of the pastels, so still being very scientifically accurate and just bringing the science close to the objects. So we managed to identify most of the pigments and dyes, as well as addressing the paper composition issues. It seems that there's still a need for sampling for binder and fixatives, and this is something we're thinking about. So if anyone has tips or success in any methods, I'd be interested to hear. There's also a strong need, this is what taught us during the project, is that there's a strong need for a reference data set. So we use the blue papers as a non-reference, but we are still lacking an 18th century reference of pastel paintings. I did work on an 18th century pastel sampler from Stoupon. This should continue, but we're trying to collect information that will tell us a little bit what's the baseline of raw materials that artists had access to. We're currently doing this for more 19th century, 20th century pastel materials, thanks to the Maison du Pastel, who's letting us study their archives. But there is still a need to go back in time in the 18th century. And for me, this is something I'm still thinking about, and I don't know exactly how to address it yet, but it's how can we recolorize the blue paper? We know, obviously, that the portrait you saw looked really discolored, very yellow, with this kind of blue halo around the face. It looks off, but how can we recolorize it accurately, knowing the actual original color? And just to finish, I'm just going to show you a little bit what's coming next in this museum, because they never stop. They just announced me, actually, just before the conference, that they got budget to restore the largest pastel in their collection. So we are going ahead with another colleague, probably next year, looking at this absolutely gigantic pastel in their collection. And I just want to thank everyone for their attention, for the people who took part into the project in different ways. And if you're interested again in the article, the QR code is on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila, for the excellent talk. Are there any questions and comments from the audience?
Hi, I'm Tia Ishi from Stuttgart. I was just wondering how the decision process came about to recolor the blue paper, because I know quite a few museums and archives that don't do that.
Yeah, it actually came because we were very, basically when I brought up the blue paper sampler with the original very bright blue color, they were quite amazed about how it must have looked like. So they started to think, the curator who's actually in charge of the museum, was interested in trying to understand, okay, what is the color relationship there, and that maybe this blue hue that we are seeing now as very imposing should actually step back a little. So they're thinking about doing it digitally. They just don't know whether they're going to just show a screen next to it. So they're not going to project light like they did in some other museums to try to correct for color change. But they're more trying to look into having like something outside next to the pastels to just show this is probably how it might have looked like. Yeah, but this is coming from the curator of the museum. Thank you. I don't think we can hear you.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very great. I'm a little bit surprised about the idea of remounting in a box, which is waterproof.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen other collection in France. They did the same, and the experience shows that it doesn't stay waterproof.
Yeah.
So we have afterwards the humidity goes in. We have a lot of mold.
Yeah.
So why not change attitude? And then I do have another question: is we are very interested into the fixing.
Yeah.
In some pastel by him, we saw the tide line of fixing. We just have a new one discovered, and we were wondering how he was fixed. And I'm looking forward to your work.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. And indeed, the debate of having something waterproof, airtight, climate boxes is a big debate still in the field. It is something I discussed with them. It's just that they don't want to change that attitude because they're very worried about actual water running because they had a traumatic experience with pipes actually breaking. But I told them that it might be okay to do that under the condition that regular checkup is performed. So the strategy, because they didn't seem to want to change attitude, but every year I'm trying a little bit, because they're also improving their storage facility. So I kind of understand the point, which is, well, we have a storage facility in which we are really worried of active leakage. Can you make something that is a physical barrier? And then maybe if we are able to improve, then maybe we will change the thing. That's why the box that is made for this museum is meant to be reversible, so easy to replace if necessary. So that's a bit the standpoint I have, is that close checkup, as I completely agree, to kind of avoid mold growth again, which is a very sensitive problem with those objects, and possible to change if slowly the mind is changing. So I think it's a very good comment. The second was indeed about the fixative. I know it's also a very big obsession of mine. I was hoping a lot with the reflectance imaging spectroscopy that we would see something under different wavelengths. Unfortunately, it was not the case, and we did have actual stains onto the Marifel portraits, for which I could take a few samples. So now they're looking at it, but they are telling me that it's very difficult for them to find any adhesive in it. They're finding a gum. So I don't know, they're still looking. I cannot give you exactly the thing. It's just that they're a little perplexed because I was thinking of an animal glue, but they're not in the sample. They're not finding an animal glue. They're finding more like a gum. So if you have ideas about this, we can discuss it together, but there's still a lot of problems just even with a sample, trying to identify what's in there. But you do see, and Latour is an interesting example because he was heavily fixing some of his pastels, and he's known to have created tide lines, indeed, around the portrait. So visually, we see that something is applied. It's just that with the non-invasive techniques we had at the time, we could not tackle that. Hopefully, with the sample, we can. So fingers crossed.
Have you done some observation on the light box? Could you see there tide lines which are covered afterwards by him with pastel?
Yeah, that's. I did take pictures in transmitted light for the two sheets. This one was lined with canvas, and even though with transmitted light I couldn't see much, but the two small portraits I did take pictures in transmitted light. I need to get back to that, and maybe we can look at it together. I don't remember seeing a tide line I would not see in the visible, but I should check that again, and I'll let you know.
Thank you very much.
Pascal Regnault from the museum in Wiesbaden. It looks to me as if you reused the original glass and didn't change it to, for example, anti-reflective glass. What do you say about long-term display of pastels? Because in a lot of houses, like here in a historic house, they're being treated like paintings.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a debate around reframing pastels. In that case, the thinking behind that was to use laminated glass and not plastic-based materials such as TrueView, so just that's a difference. We have not noticed transfer of pastel pigments throughout the years I've been working on the glass. We did see that if you use plastic, so I would not recommend that. In that case, for the Abbott, they really wanted to change the glass because it was heavily scratched, and that's a problem that they have in this collection, maybe because of the history of those pastels, is that the glass is heavily damaged, so very scratched. They are replaced. There are not many original glazing left, or what we can say is original. So they take it, they still keep the glass, and they take it apart, but they feel more confident keeping laminated glass, also for the comfort of the visitor. And they have a lot of comments from the visitors saying that they see much more the object. And you see the difference in the galleries when the pastels are not reframed and still hold an older glazing, like a single glazing, a lot of reflections, so the people are not able to see very well the picture, while they do enjoy a lot the non-reflective laminated glass. So it's the choice of the museum. We have not noticed a transfer of pastels, but I'm happy to discuss that further if anyone has seen it. The only thing we've seen, and that's maybe a call for people because we still don't understand what it is, and I discussed with paintings people about that, is that we do see, and I know at the Rijksmuseum this is the case, that with the laminated glass, we see a halo appearing on the outside or probably also on the inside, which we can't figure out exactly what it is. I was told that paintings conservators see that a lot as well. They attribute that to a kind of chemical reaction happening in the frame with the varnish. In that case, we don't have a varnish, but I've seen that in different collections after a few years of reframing. So this is something, I don't know exactly what's going on. We don't see it always, but we see it sometimes, so yeah.
We have time for one more last question. Anyone?
Henriette Reismüller, I don't have a question, just one little correction. In the beginning, you got a bit mixed up in history because you said the Nazis came in 1917.
No,
but,
yeah.
Yes, that should be clear, of course, to every German person in here.
Yeah.
But as Renate Messmer mentioned yesterday, there are more than 20 other nations present. So
It's a very good comment. Thank you very much.